Okay, so the first one is making beliefs pay rent, and then in parentheses, in anticipated experiences. And this is a very famous post.
This is
Yes, it is.
the one if I had to share one post with somebody about like what is this what is rationality, what is like what's an example of a technique, what do you mean you like use cognitive science to better your thinking, like this is the one I would point them to.
Huh.
This isn't the like my favorite post.
Yeah.
It's up there, but it's not the one I get the most personal meaning out of, but I feel like it's one that really quickly summarizes like, hey, look, here's a thing that you can notice in your head, maybe, and this is an example of a technique, and it's succinctly readable in 5 minutes.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think I agree. This one kind of is the core of the skills that you would build on for the rest of the rationalist techniques.
Oh, I hope we can do it justice. Should I summarize the first intro part?
Sure.
So in the beginning, Eliezer relates the old question, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? One person says, yes it does, for it makes vibrations in the air. Another says, no it does not, for there's no auditory processing in any brain. There's a little bit more said, but I'm skipping ahead to, though the two argue, one saying no and the other saying yes, they do not anticipate any different experiences. The two think they have different models of the world, but they have no difference with respect to what they expect will happen to them. Their maps of the world do not diverge in any sensory detail. And he said things like, would they expect for if a recorder was put there for it not to pick up anything, or do they expect if similar sound waves hit an ear, would it not make any firings in the brain, that sort of thing. So
There was I think it was some internet thing that I missed, but my coworkers a couple years ago were talking about like the is water wet question.
right.
And I relayed this exact argument, and I'm like, first of all, well, I skipped, I dove into the argument with them for a couple minutes, and I was like, wait a minute, let's just take a step back. What would be the difference if it was or wasn't?
Mhm.
Like, are we having different like predictions here? And they're like, no. And I'm like, then what's the point? And they're like, that's not the point. I'm like, that is the point.
Yeah. People seem to often confuse factual arguments for semantic arguments. The whole tree falling is kind of like, well, how are you defining the word sound? Is it the vibrations in the air existing or not, or whether there's someone listening to it's just you're making a semantics argument. Like, what are you actually trying to predict? And then
I never
what's up?
realized that was the other side of it, that there's auditory processing, which is what sound is. Like, I was like, of course it makes a sound. What are you talking about? How is this a koan,
Yeah. Eliezer says a foundational skill in the martial art of rationality is the ability to spot inside your own head psychological signs that you have a mental map of something and signs that you don't. So, in the example of the tree, how are you defining sound? And do you know that sound is vibrations in the air? And then could you test that? Could you record it? And is it going to show sound waves,
So that's where the, I guess, anticipated experiences part comes in.
Yeah, like basically it's kind of saying change the question to, do these two people walking through the forest anticipate having different experiences of hearing a tree fall? Yeah. And like the answer is no.
Yeah. And he points out a little bit later that the different experiences are not necessarily always like anticipations of different sensory experiences. Like he said, when you if you're trying to determine when a ball hits the ground, you got to use beliefs like Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second, and this building is 120 meters tall. And those aren't anticipations of a sensory experiences, they're verbal propositions in your head. But these two beliefs have inferential consequences that are direct sensory anticipation, like when you would see the ball hit or when you would hear the thing on the ground. So your beliefs can change what you anticipate being your experiences.
Yeah. It was saying also, it's tempting to try to eliminate this by insisting that the only legitimate kind of belief is the anticipation of sensory experience, but the world actually has a lot of data that we can't sense. Like, we can't see atoms, there's sounds past our range, there's colors we can't see. We can't see math.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could use math to calculate when the ball is going to hit the ground. Humans are better than any other species at learning to model the unseen. And then Eliezer says, this is both our great strength and our great weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Because humans often believe in things that are not only seen but unreal.
Yeah.
Like, he brought up again the alchemists' concept of phlogiston being something that creates fire, causes heat. Like, what is it? I don't know. It's the thing that does it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it must exist if it happens.
Right. I anticipate that when I put heat on this wood, phlogiston will come out, and that'll make bright lights and more heat, I guess. But it wasn't tied to anything real.
Yeah, it's tied to the kind of inferential chain there. Well, something causes the fire, so I'm going to call it phlogiston. Or, yeah, this seems like it should be a thing that is true. Or kind of ideas about things like ghosts, because we've evolved to model things as being agents. Like, we're evolved to model other human minds. So we see lots of things as either having been made by a human or having some kind of human-like sentience and agency and a reason that it's doing what it's doing that like follows anthropic principles.
Yeah, he mentioned a good way to, well, let me just read the poll then. The rationalist virtue of empiricism consists of constantly asking which experiences our beliefs predict, or better yet, prohibit. Do you believe that phlogiston is the cause of fire? Then what do you expect to see happen because of that? Do you believe that if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it still makes a sound? Then what experiences must therefore befall you? It is even better to ask, what experiences must not happen to you? Do you believe that elan vital explains the mysterious aliveness of living beings? Then what does this belief not allow to happen? What would definitely falsify this belief? A null answer means that your belief does not constrain experiences. It permits anything to happen to you. So, yeah, if your beliefs don't actually disallow things from happening, they don't do much of anything.
Yeah. There was also, do unreal things connect to any sensory experiences? No. I'm trying to think, like, I'm remembering, what was that show, Ghost Hunters? Where they were they're using carpentry tools incorrectly and then trying to say that it's evidence of ghosts, but if a ghost were a real thing, you would anticipate some kind of sensory experience, maybe a cold drop, maybe sounds, maybe you could capture something on video.
Except for all of those, and this is, I don't think Brian Dunning was the first one to put it this way, but he put it this way most succinctly when I came across it, that like everything that the ghost hunters do, all their tools of low frequency vibrations, cold spots, etc. It's like they use all of these and be like, look, ghosts, and it's like we haven't established that ghosts do that. So like ghosts have no known properties. So to say that this cold drop is indicative of a ghost means that would necessitate that we've already established that ghosts make things cold.
I mean,
why on earth should that be the case? Like, if you ask me,
supposedly there's a bunch of a lot of anecdotal reports of people seeing ghosts, and they say that there's connected phenomena. If people were actually able to consistently measure the same phenomena in places where people also experience psychological disturbance, then maybe that would be something interesting. But pretty much what we've shown is that no,
sure, or
we cannot measure anything like that.
Or like an old basement with creaky hinges, like, maybe you get light carbon monoxide poisoning down there and you start hallucinating stuff. Like, that would explain all these things as well, right? What we need is like a ghost in a box that we can hold a thermometer to, that we can poke with a stick, that we can put a microphone next to, and all that stuff.
Well, lots of times they say that what causes these things to happen is ectoplasm.
Right.
Which is basically phlogiston for ghosts, right?
I don't know if the ghost hunters say that. I know the Ghostbusters did.
Yeah.
But, like, not to say that ghost hunting is a sophisticated field. Just
about as sophisticated as ghost busting.
Yeah. They're not literally cartoon caricatures of themselves. Exactly. Anyway, how about belief in belief?
Oh, can I close out with what his ending paragraph, which is the one that I loved?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
At the very end, he says, above all, don't ask what to believe, ask what to anticipate. Every question of belief should flow from a question of anticipation, and that question of anticipation should be the center of the inquiry. Every guess of belief should begin by flowing to a specific guess of anticipation and should continue to pay rent in future anticipations. If a belief turns deadbeat, evict it. Which is just a great thing. Like, if your beliefs are doing nothing for you at all, why do you even have them?
Gotta make them pay rent.
That's right. Using up all that valuable brain real estate. So, belief in belief.
Belief in belief starts with Carl Sagan's invisible dragon parable, which briefly is Like, the friend comes to you and says, hey, I've got a dragon in my garage. And you're like, that's so cool. I want to see. Oh, well, you can't really see it. It's invisible. Oh, okay. Well, no problem. I'll throw some flour on it. Well, it's permeable to flour. Okay. Well, we'll put, we'll measure the amount of oxygen and CO2 in the air and we'll watch it breathe. Well, it doesn't actually, exhale CO2. Okay. We'll listen for its footsteps. Well, it has inaudible footsteps. And so Carl Sagan uses this as the idea that bad hypotheses need to do fast footwork in order to avoid falsification, right?
Yeah.
And I like this because I'd read Science as a Candle in the Dark. That's the subtitle to
The Demon Haunted World.
Thank you.
Yeah,
The Demon
it's a
Haunted
great
World.
book.
Yeah, which is like hey, what's skepticism? Read this book.
Yeah.
And Carl Sagan's a beautiful author and great examples, and he's a smart guy as
And
underselling
very
it.
compassionate, too.
I know, he was wonderful.
Some people I know didn't like the tone of the New Atheists. I think Carl Sagan kind of... If you're somebody that's just put off by Richard Dawkins for whatever reason, then, like, I would recommend people read Carl Sagan, because it's just, like, almost the Mr. Rogers of science.
Yeah, he...
Got the sweater vest and everything, I think.
Yeah, imagine, like, I mean, Neil
No, he
deGrasse...
had a turtleneck.
Yeah, he did. Neil deGrasse Tyson's, like, I think Carl Sagan's shoes were so big that, like, five people fill them now. But Neil deGrasse Tyson fills them in some of the ways, like, for example, hosting Cosmos. I could go on and on. If anyone hasn't seen the first episode of the revamp of Cosmos, and if you're not interested, even just watch the last 10 minutes to get a kind of feel for the character of who Carl Sagan was. I could go on, but I don't know.
Hail Sagan.
Yeah, he's great. Hail Sagan, yes. So what I liked about this post is that I was already familiar with it, and as a budding young rationalist coming across this, I'm like, finally, something I've heard of. And then he goes on to expand it in a way that I thought was really interesting. So,
Yeah.
belief in belief.
Yeah, he says that he uses this parable to make a different point. The claimant must have an accurate model of the situation somewhere in their mind, because they can anticipate in advance exactly which experimental results they'll need to excuse. Which is pretty cool when you think about it.
Yep. Yeah, we're capable of holding a lot of contradictory beliefs as humans. People are really good at compartmentalization. I used to be really confused as to how, a biologist who specializes in, like, studying the RNA of bacteria can also be, like, a young Earth creationist.
Right.
And that's how you explained it. It's just like, this is my science world beliefs, and this is my religion world beliefs, and they don't overlap.
It's still not clear to me how to...
context that I activate them in.
And yet somehow, somewhere deep in his brain, there's something like making excuses for one, subconsciously, because he can't admit that he knows.
It's still not clear to me. Like, so I understand, like, yes, you can take your science coat off and put your church coat on Sunday. It's still not clear to me how you don't notice that you're doing that.
You don't have the self-awareness.
Yeah.
Or you are aware of the cognitive dissonance, and then you just always push it to the side, because you're like, well, not dealing with that. I remember doing that.
Oh.
A thing that parts of your mind can do is actively suppress other thoughts, if it's useful to do so.
If you're not inclined to listen to the part of you that's saying, "Hey, shut up over there," right?
Right, like you have to have like a distaste for shutting down your own thoughts to even escape this in the first place.
I think that's what I've always had. Like I've never liked. I've always noticed when I was suppressing a thought.
Mm-hmm. And it always kind of hurts, right?
It's this weird stingy feeling in my brain, and I think part of, I guess, methods of rationality is raising that to like a louder noise or a heartier hurt, just so like you're aware that you're doing it.
I almost think that like the sequences and the methods are written for people who already like have that, and this is ways of how to fix the things that raise those alarms all the time.
Yeah. And then now that you've got them and you've got all this bulwark in place, what you can do with it.
Yeah.
I definitely think that was the context of the sequences. This was kind of written after New Atheism and skepticism became popular.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think Stephen and I were talking about this one day. We were just hanging out randomly, but like, I feel like I discovered the sequences after I kind of went through my like angry atheist phase. I'm gonna argue with believers, and then like I kind of got tired of that, and it's like this is kind of like the next step, I think.
Right.
Yeah, that was my journey too. It's also worth pointing out that Carl Sagan's writings predates the New Atheists by like 20 years.
Yeah.
So the tone of religion sucks, man. What I mean,
The term wouldn't have been tolerated 20 years ago.
Exactly. And to be fair, I think that was basically Sagan's opinion, but he was way nicer about it.
I think
And
he's
when
on record saying that, actually, like, being much less charitable when he's, like, in his own house.
And also, that wasn't 20 years ago. That was like 35 years ago.
But 20 years before the New Atheists.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
right. Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah, it just seems like that was yesterday because we're old.
Yes. Our younger listeners are like, Jesus Christ, man.
That one 14-year-old.
Jeez.
Like,
yeah.
man, these guys are old.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get past the explicit warning on iTunes to listen to this?
Do we have an explicit warning?
I think so.
We say fuck occasionally.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess we talk about dead babies and dead baby Hitler
I'm
a
not
lot.
sure we've... Well, okay, we do talk about dead baby Hitler.
Alright.
Did we
So-
finish summarizing this?
Yes.
Empiricism's supposed to prevent us from making this class of mistake, because our beliefs are supposed to pay rent, as we just got finished explaining. But then, and this kind of also ties back into replacing guilt, what about the beliefs that you're supposed to believe? Eliezer brings up Santa Claus when you're a kid. And then also has a little Daniel Dennett quote, where it's difficult to believe a thing, it's often much easier to believe that you ought to believe it.
Should.
And then it gets worse. Nobody will admit to themselves, I don't believe in the ultimate cosmic sky, that I don't believe the ultimate cosmic sky is blue and green, but I believe I ought to believe it. Not unless they're unusually capable of acknowledging their own lack of virtue. Which kind of answers your problem with that, Stephen.
Yeah.
People don't want to believe in belief, they just believe in belief, they just believe in belief.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to say.
It is. Yeah, again, that was people don't believe in belief, they just believe in belief.
There we go.
What's virtuous is to believe, not to believe in believing.
Yeah, I think I had another thing with Dan Dennett there, but I forgot what it was. Yep, it's gone. Other than if you like that little witticism of so Dennett's quote was, where it's difficult to believe a thing, it's often much easier to believe that you ought to believe it. I think Dennett coined the term belief in belief.
I think so too.
Yeah, there's a lot of things floating around there that Dennett's actually responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
The only book of his that I actually finished reading was Breaking the Spell.
Okay.
A lot of his stuff is, and maybe I should try again. It's been 10 or 15 years since I've tried, but back when I was a teenager, it was too dense to, like, I read it because, like, this seems really cool, and I'm just like, this is getting hard, and you're not keeping my interest, but I bet it would now. So, anyway, yeah. So, belief should include unspoken anticipation controllers. Belief in belief should include unspoken cognitive behavior guiders. The dragon claimant anticipates as if there's no dragon in the garage and makes excuses as if they believed in the belief. That's what I was going to say about Dennett, was that I remember he had another quote that there are more people that believe in belief than there are people who actually believe, because he's met, like, I don't know, people like pastors struggling with, like, not believing in stuff anymore but thinking that they should. And kind of by default, every believer believes in belief. And as long as there's one person who just believes, or rather, every believer, like, believes, right? And there's at least some people who believe in belief, that, like, I should still be believing this, and that's like that's a de facto premise of belief. So it was just fun to imagine, like, yes, there are by necessity more people who believe in belief than there are people who actually believe stuff.
Yeah.
It's not that interesting, but just, again, it was one of those other little Dennett kind of, he has this way of being able to put on, like, meta glasses whenever he wants.
Well, I think it seems like actually like a rationalist virtue to, like, be able to have beliefs but not believe in those beliefs, of, like, have the belief but then, like, be ready to just, like, throw it away as soon as you see any counter evidence that is convincing.
Yeah, have beliefs that you can update.
Right. I think update is a
when you
better
encounter
term
evidence.
than just throw away
Well,
as soon as you see any.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
relinquishment
yeah.
is one of the 12 virtues of rationality.
Yeah.
Which
But
we
relinquishment with enough cause.
Right. Yeah, we haven't done the 12 virtues. Maybe we'll do that at some point.
Yeah.
All right. The 12 virtues is this short post that I won't go into any of them, but it's the, as the title suggests, the 12 virtues of rationality, and it's all written in, like, preachy high talk. That if this was your first exposure to the community, you'd be like, oh, this guy's insane, and they're all cultists. But it gives nice flowery language to, like, refer back to and say, thus it was written, or, hence it was written that this.
Yeah.
And as long as you know you're doing it tongue in cheek, as everyone does, unless you're coming across one of these things in the wild, then it's a lot of fun to have that kind of highfalutin language to point things at.
Eliezer says that it's not psychologically realistic to say that the dragon claimant believes it's beneficial to believe that there's a dragon, but it is realistic to say that the dragon claimant anticipates as if there is no dragon in the garage and makes excuses as if they believed.
Alright, and then we had one more sequence,
Bayesian Judo!
which is just a little story.
It's fun!
It's a fun story. So, the true tales of Eliezer Yudkowsky. So, Eliezer Yudkowsky is at a dinner party when someone said to him,
You're
Oh, that's right, I'm
yeah.
the doofus.
Doofus.
I don't believe artificial intelligence is possible, because only God can make a soul.
Eliezer replied,
You mean if I can make an artificial intelligence, it proves your religion is false?
when realizing that he'd made his hypothesis vulnerable to falsification. He then said,
Well, I didn't mean that you couldn't make an intelligence, just that it couldn't be emotional in the same way we are.
to which Eliezer replied,
Well, so if I make an artificial intelligence that, without being deliberately programmed, without any sort of script, starts talking about an emotional life that sounds like ours, that means your religion is wrong.
I guess we may have to agree to disagree on this.
Then Eliezer brought up Omen's agreement theorem, which shows that no two rationalists can agree to disagree.
If two people disagree with each other, at least one of them must be doing something wrong.
Finally, he said,
Well, I guess I was really trying to say that I don't think you can make something eternal.
Well, I don't think so either. I'm glad we were able to reach agreement on this, as Omen's agreement theorem requires.
to which Eliezer stretched out his hand, and he shook it, and then he wandered away.
I loved the line, the one realized he had just made his hypothesis vulnerable to falsification. But, dude, who would have come up with that reply?
Well, that's why I liked in the longer version, he says, At this point, I must have become divinely inspired, because
Yeah.
I instantly responded. You mean if I can make artificial intelligence that proves your religion's false?
Like, I would have thought of something like, well, that's stupid, God doesn't exist, or souls don't exist, or something, you know? Like, this will never be an issue because there are no souls. But it was like, oh, I can disprove your God with your own claim.
He got to have a shower thought, like, in real time and have that conversation.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was beautiful. I also want to say that the reason I put these three in for this week instead of just two like we normally do is because this is directly ties back to making beliefs pay rent in anticipated experience. It's one of those things that what does your beliefs not allow to happen, right? If this guy really believes that only God can make a soul, then you cannot create an AI. So that is actually a belief that pays rent in anticipated experience, except then he walked it back right away because, you know, can't have your God be falsifiable.
But then, assuming that he stuck to it and actually updated, he then changed his belief to be, different. So his new belief is...
His new belief would be there's no God once there's an AI.
Exactly.
Which isn't actually going to happen. But that was a beautiful example of beliefs paying rent.
Yeah.
And using that to, Bayesian Judo someone into atheism.
Yeah. Like, your beliefs can't kind of just be a bunch of nodes unconnected from each other. It's real easy to actually, like, point out contradictory thoughts. I think, isn't that what people do when they're doing street epistemology? Is not even really tell the person things, but just ask them questions, leading them to realize that the things they believe are contradictory.
Yeah. The Socratic method.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, that you don't really... And I think our street epistemologists... His name was also Stephen, wasn't it?
I don't remember. It's been like 2.5 years.
I'm 90% sure, because that's a great name, and I think it stuck with me.
Okay, cool.
I think that it's I think street epistemology is practiced in a way that's slightly less aggressive than the Socratic method, but that's sort of the same thing. It's like, look, if you really believe this, then you'd be saying this, right? And it's like, well, I'm not saying that, so I must not really believe this. Yeah.
I also, back when I was getting into atheism, when new atheism was a new thing, that was what a lot of the forum stuff was. It was basically... It wasn't street epistemology, because street epistemology is friendly, and it like uses the Socratic method to trick people into questioning their own beliefs, right? Whereas the forums were a lot of like, boom, checkmate atheist, or boom, checkmate theist, I just proved the logical contradiction in your own claims.
If people evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys?
Checkmate atheists.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. So for next time, we will be covering the LessWrong posts, Professing and Cheering, and Belief as Attire. And there will be links to those on our website, thebayesianconspiracy.org.